All right, here we go. You know, stress, we all feel it, especially with the current headlines about disease and rioting and looting that's going on across the country. We're feeling that anxiety and stress that wells up within us. But imagine getting ready to go to your job for the day, knowing truly that there's a very real possibility that you might not come back that day. Well, how important would your faith be in that moment? And how vital would the promise of the next life be to you on that day? Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard. We're going to get some key insights today from some people who've been there as members of the military and who know what that's like firsthand. You'll definitely want to hear these stories. This is the last in our series of First Liberty Live episodes in connection with Military Appreciation Month. We've got the anniversary of D-Day coming up, so we thought we'd do one more in here before we wrapped everything up. And with that anniversary, as an organization, we wanted to take a moment here to just honor someone with a close connection to one of our cases. His name is Herman Herc Streitberger. He died just a few days ago. He would have been 101 later this month. He was a gunner on a B-24 in World War II. And on his 50th mission, which was to be the last mission of his tour, his plane was shot out of the sky. And he talked about how it was on fire. He got up on his tiptoes and just leaned out the side of the B-24 and went down under his parachute. He was captured and was held in a German POW camp for most of a year. But then, as they were moving them to a different location, he and another guy managed to escape and got back across Allied lines. An amazing story. Well, Herc donated his Bible, and I've got a picture of it here, for a POW remembrance table up in New Hampshire at a VA facility there. And of course, you know, one of the usual groups that challenges such things, that's his Bible right here in the box. One of the usual groups came along and challenged that and wanted it removed because they said that Bible has no place there. Well, First Liberty is currently defending Herc's Bible as against a challenge from one of those groups. So we just wanted to take a moment here before we get started and say, Herc, we salute you and all the others who served in World War II. Thank you for your service. All right, I would have loved to have heard Herc's thoughts on our topic today, but I'm also looking forward to hearing from our guests. So I'm gonna go around and introduce everybody real quick and then we'll get started. Steve Drum, wave your hand there. This is Steve. Steve is a combat tested, retired Navy SEAL Master Chief, 27 years of experience in leading and developing high-performance teams, including combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's an expert on handling stress in combat. Chad Hennings, Chad, say hi. Chad flew 45 combat missions in an A-10 for the Air Force. He also played in the NFL for 9 years, including 3 Super Bowl championships with the Dallas Cowboys. I want to see the rings sometime, Chad. I just want to get a look at him. And we're glad to have him with us. Dave Holmes. Hi, Dave. Say hey. Dave flew an F-4 Phantom for the Air Force, served more than 20 years, achieving the rank of colonel. He's also First Liberty's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer. And he also, I just love hearing him tell stories. Dave is one of our team members here at First Liberty. Dave, thank you for being here with us. All right, Steve, we're going to start with you. As a Navy SEAL, you had to function at the very highest level while under fire in downtown Baghdad. I've heard you say that mental and physical toughness is essential in that kind of situation, but also that it's not enough, that it also takes spiritual toughness. Explain what you mean by spiritual toughness under stress.
Well, I think it's obvious to most watching that, you know, when it comes to military operations, we need or in the case of the Navy, our sailors, our young officers, soldiers, Marines, we need them to be physically tough, right? I think we can all understand that. We also need them to be able to perform under pressure, right? They train with the skills and the drills, and now they got to be able to do it and execute it in the clutch. But the next leg of that three-legged stool is the spiritual toughness, because in addition to needing men and women who are physically tough and mentally tough, we need men and women of character, which means that we need them to make the right moral and ethical decisions when things get really dark, when they get uncertain, when they have doubt, and when they feel like they're facing setbacks, when they feel like they're facing challenges. They need to understand where they can lean in for those sources of strength and lean into their faith, when things are dark, when they question, they question the mission, they question why they're doing what they're doing. They lean into the things that provide them strength, and that's faith, and that's relationships and connections.
And there are a lot of moral decisions that are made in real time under that pressure, and that character really comes into play for them.
It does. And for an example, like, some of the times when we'd be on patrol in Iraq, I remember hearing one of my teammates talk about how, there's times when the bad guys would pay young kids to throw grenades at us, right? And you're faced with a child who has a grenade. What do you do? Right? What do you do? And unfortunately, this decision is that, you sometimes you have to engage that child. And you have to live with the consequences of that. But, that's the tactical decision you have to make. And you can imagine another situation, when two ships collide, if there's combat operations on the open seas, that sometimes when your ship takes on water and it starts to sink, it takes on flooding, that you have to make the decision to shut off certain compartments to maintain, the buoyancy and watertight integrity. And sometimes you have to do so knowing that your brothers and sisters could be on the other side of that door, but you have to do it to save the ship.
Stuart, if I could piggyback on that 1 second, the story that Steve shared regarding making those moral and ethical decisions. A personal example, my mentor from the Air Force Academy was a retired one-star general whose grandson went on to serve in the U.S. Marines. In 2004, back when we went back in, he ended up having to do just what Steve said. He had to fire upon a young child that had a bomb belt wrapped around him, and he had to make that decision: do I fire, or because it's a kid, and the kid had no choice. So what do you do? Well, anyway, he came back from his first deployment, came back, and he couldn't reconcile that. So you talk about spiritual resiliency. He couldn't reconcile that, and the young man ended up taking his life.
Wow.
Dealing with the post-traumatic stress of that event. And that's very real. And that's why it's so important for our military men and women to have access to chaplains and to have that freedom of your faith and how you exemplify it. Because when you're making those decisions real time and then coming back and having to reconcile and deal with those things, your whole identity is wrapped around who are you? And as Christians, it's who are we in Jesus Christ? And it is vital that our men and women have those freedoms and continue to have those freedoms because of examples just like that.
Chad, that's the question that I had written for you is right in that line. So I'd like to go ahead and pose it to you. Your path had you facing the unique stresses of flying an A-10 low and slow, and also the pressures of being an elite athlete, being in those as a defensive tackle in several Super Bowls, trying to make split-second decisions. But whenever I read anything about you, one of the words that always shows up along with those two notes is character, which seems to be a theme that we're developing here. How does faith inform character during those high stress moments of life? You've talked about it a bit. Unpack that a bit more for us.
Yeah, for me, it's any foundational principle of an individual I'll call it to live that life of excellence, however you want to define that, but to live like life of excellence, the foundational principle is identity. Who are you? Who do you choose to be? A lot of, unfortunately, as men, we define that aspect of, what we do for an occupation and or how much money we make if you're in the business realm, or accolades that we can say this is our value, this is who we are, but what you do does not define who you are. So when you have that foundational aspect and where character comes in, for me, I don't care what you do, if you know who you are, your identity, then you have that aspect of integrity and character, whether that's such traits as humility, courage, willingness to listen to others, many other moral and functional characteristics of integrity. That's what living a life of excellence is all about. It doesn't matter whether you're an attorney, you're a fighter pilot, Navy SEAL, professional athlete, teacher, lawyer, coach. That to me is the formula of what it is to live a biblical life of excellence.
And Dave, you've been at the controls of an F-4 skimming 100 feet off the ground, just above the treetops. Most people admire the skill it takes just to do that. But you also credit your faith with making you who you are. How do those two connect in your life?
Yeah, I think hearing the comments from Chad and Steve also remind me that in many cases, when you're in a high stress, high impact set of circumstances, that both my brothers can understand very well, is that you have to have a set of values, a core set of values as to what you believe before you actually sometimes get into those situations. Because I know in the flying game, there's a lot of muscle memory. There's a lot of preconditioning you have to go through. I know that the special ops business, Steve, and you guys do the same thing, that you go through in your mind different scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? Things happen so quickly and so fast, especially in my area, flying fighters at low altitude in all sorts of terrain and bad weather. You have to run those things through your mind and ahead of time. So if you're faced with a set of circumstances, your training takes over. But if there's a faith rolls into it when you're faced with something unnew that is new and can create a sense of anxiety or fear. There's a time early in my flying life, I was quite experienced actually, but we had the Cold War was not actually that cold. You've heard me say that before, Stephen, and we lost a lot of guys during the period where the Soviet Union was in fact the 9-foot bear out there. They were very adventuresome and very aggressive, and so we found ourselves deployed a lot around the world in all sorts of odd circumstances. In many cases, you might be out there with just 1 or 2 aircraft in some of these locations, and you're faced with a set of circumstances that kind of grip you. And we lost a lot of people. And so there was a period in my own life where I was a Christian going in. I had this core set of values, but that was challenged, frankly. I fortunately read a book once called, one of the chapters called Officer of the Dead, about a Marine Corps lieutenant that was a mortuary affairs officer. And it got inside his head. Well, we were losing so many guys that it got into mine, frankly, a bit. And so I remember feeling like every time I'd go out to the aircraft flying to the mission, today was my day. And it wasn't until I was on a particular sortie where I know the Lord just reached down and grabbed me out of a situation where I was a second or two away from impacting a ridgeline. And being experienced enough, I remember looking at that situation thinking, I'm dead. And when I broke out about 20,000 feet in clear sunshine, my backseater, who had been over North Vietnam for 100 missions, he says, are we dead? And I could hear him breathing, and I'm going, my answer was, I don't know. And then I saw number 2 pop out, number 3 and number 4 pop out. This overcast, it was undercast below us. So I knew that we weren't dead at that point, but it made my faith so real to me that I know the Lord knew who I was. Before it was sort of I would call it a paper faith, or something like that, where I knew it was easy. I'd grown up as a Christian, but the Lord reached down and grabbed me and pulled me out of that fire. And the next day when I had to go out and fly, my world changed. It became real that if I did, die, I knew where I was going. It became very, very real. And so I think the faith informed my military service from that point on, where I could go out and be who I needed to be and fly these missions and not worry so much about crashing and burning, as we would say. And I was much better for it.
For those of you who are watching, we want you to be able to enter the conversation on this topic with the people in your life, with the facts on your side about the role of faith in the military. So we put together a downloadable booklet. It's called Faith and Freedom, Force Multipliers in America's Military. It's free. You'll find it very helpful. There's a lot of good information in there. All you have to do is go to firstliberty.org/booklet, and you can download your free copy. It's our gift to you. Now, a question for the group. I know each of you has had the opportunity along the way to share some insights about life in the military with young people who are just starting out on that path, who are either about to put on the uniform or just beginning their career. What do you tell them about the importance of faith while in uniform, especially given that that things are changing. There have been activist groups that have really been hammering away at all the branches of the military, trying to get them to clamp down on expressions of faith. What's your advice to those young people as they try to enter into the military while still maintaining their faith? What do you say?
I'll take that one to start off the conversation anyway. I can remember when I first went to the Air Force Academy, starting there, we were all made the assumption that we sacrifice our rights to the larger cause of the military, that we didn't have, the religious freedoms or the constitutional rights that we have under the Bill of Rights. So there's that kind of that misconception that, yeah, you could have your faith, but it was personal. You couldn't share it. You couldn't do anything, which was as far from the truth as can be. And I remember a case where First Liberty was actually got engaged at the Air Force Academy. Some cadets had put on their bulletin boards their whiteboards outside their dorm rooms, a Bible verse. And somebody took offense to that and said that, you can't do that. Separation of church and state, this is a military. You can't have a Bible on your desk, or you can't, pray publicly in these things, and which is as far from the truth. And it just so happened that Kelly, the CEO of First Liberty, was speaking at a symposium on character and leadership at the Academy. And it was probably the most attended breakout session of anybody that was there. And this is over a 3-day event. They have individuals from all walks of life that speak and present there, because cadets were confused, or they were ignorant. They just didn't know what their religious liberties and freedoms are. But after Kelly spoke, a religious revival, if they were religious or not, every cadet, because of the rebellious nature of young people today, were writing Bible verses on their whiteboards outside their dorm area. But it's just a testimony of a lot of things that for young people, when they go into the military, is to realize that the rights you had going in, they're still the rights. You can share your faith openly. You can pray. You can seek spiritual counsel from chaplains, etc. That who you are does not have to change once you're in the military.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve?
And I'd say, my experience is, and this is just me, right? But my experience is that I haven't seen in the military religious freedoms being trampled or restricted. Especially the last command that I worked at was Navy Recruit Training Command, which is Navy's boot camp, the one and only up in North Chicago. And, being a part of the leadership conversations, it was always paramount that all recruits and all service members, attached staff members, were given every opportunity to practice their faith, and very careful to not restrict or get in the way of that. And of course, as you conduct combat operations, in the military, a lot of times, you got to do that, and you're going to work Sundays, and you're going to do things like that. But within that, I think the military does a really good job with trying to make sure that you're getting your faith support network in organized and to you in the most effective ways as possible. And, I've been in many austere environments where they've made sure that we had access to chaplain support and things like that. So I'd say to feel confident that you'd be in a good place, that you'll be protected.
Dave, you want to chime in?
Yeah, that's really great to hear, Steve. And I'd be interested from both of you guys about this. I found that institutionally in the military, and I served well before you guys, but institutionally we had chaplains and we had chaplains on base, and there was an understanding that that there would be an acceptance of people of faith. But I found the real challenge sometimes turned out to be my own squadron mates, or guys that we had characters, people that were real gung ho and got their fangs out, and so what I tell some young friends that are currently getting ready to go in the military, one is about to go into an F-16 unit actually, that your faith's going to be challenged, and it's sometimes going to come from your own squadron mates, your buddies. And that's why I was alluding to earlier, my earlier comments, you have to kind of precondition your mind how you're going to react. What values are you going to uphold no matter what? And because they will be challenged and people will confront you about them. Did you guys have similar circumstances like that where you felt like you were an odd man out in some cases because of your faith?
For me, looking back on that, when you're deployed, you have a lot of time to spend time with guys in intimate sessions. And we had those conversations that at the squadron level, we never really had an issue. We respected one another. We talked about it. And we knew the guys who had a Christian belief. And, it wasn't a big deal. There was no animosity within it. But, yeah. And, there was no aggression. So for me personally, I had a pretty good experience in that regard.
Well, and I think that, my experiences are unique to, the SEAL teams mostly, to where I didn't see, and of course some people are they are a lot more, they display their faith openly a lot more than other people do who do it quietly. And of course, sometimes that's going to invite, in the SEAL teams, we make fun of everybody for everything. And so if there's an opportunity for us to tease you and make fun of you, then we're going to do that. But I think it's also, it's part of understanding there's people to your left and right that are your brothers and sisters that may not be folks of faith, and it doesn't make them bad people. And you have to learn to, embrace them as well. Right. And sometimes it's a matter of they're not adversaries because they weren't raised in the same manner in which maybe we were, but it's our opportunity to lead. It's our opportunity to model good behavior and to model, what our, values, principles, and beliefs look like. And sometimes that will help invite people in, right? In doing so. So.
Yeah, I've always felt that faith properly expressed is winsome, not brash. But I've seen some people who get brash about their faith, and cause problems really with it. But properly expressed, I think, is something that draws people, because that's the nature of faith. It's the nature of that relationship with God. With our work here at First Liberty Institute, we regularly have to push back against organizations that are on the other side of these issues, that are actively trying to severely limit expressions of faith within the military, any expression of faith. Chad, you mentioned, little whiteboards on the dorm walls, or dorm doors there at the academy. I remember a story about a service member who had just Bible verses on her cubicle wall and was challenged over that. Most recently, we've had chaplains who've been challenged because they had the audacity to express their faith outside the walls of the chapel, because of coronavirus. Their only way to share effectively was either social media or email. So they did, and they got challenged over it. When you hear that, I want to hear first, what do you think about it? And then what do you think the long-term impact would be if that was left unchecked? And third, what is the way to properly push back against those challenges when they occur?
Well, I'd say it's part of an overall narrative that I think we find frustrating. And I think the initial thing that comes to mind is this politically correct, this cancel culture, or trolling, meaning, let me find a way to make somebody else, let me find a way to pick at, let me find a way to show how I'm more righteous. So let me get in there and try to knock somebody else down. And I think that's a lot of what we see when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's not necessarily they're coming from some place of virtue, atheistic virtue. And I think it's a lot of times it's just picking at that. And I think, what they don't understand the role in which chaplains serve. Chaplains are not solely there just to provide a religious service, right? They're not just there to talk about that. They're there, if you're not a person of faith, they're there for you as well to find, you can find comfort in talking to the chaplains. It's what they're trained to do. And so they also help with, teach that spiritual toughness and things like that. And I think it's extremely unfortunate as it comes to pushing back. I think that's, I don't know a creative way in doing that, but really never missing an opportunity to say, this is the value that chaplains provide. Here's the services that they also provide beyond just their specific religious service. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah.
Yeah. For me, that latter part of the question is what we can do is what First Liberty is already doing, providing resources to individual active duty military members about, what their rights are, as well as to support the chaplain corps, and defending them, because you're setting precedents. When other commanders, they realize that, if a commander overstepped their bounds regarding restriction of religious liberties on their base, and that decision is reversed, that doesn't reflect well upon that wing, regarding in the Air Force or that base commander. And, they don't want to do that. So, a lot of it is an education for our leadership as to what it is, and, for people to share their testimonies, as Steve shared too, with the value of what, chaplains and religious services and belief and counseling services, et cetera, provide for those individuals when they are under duress. Marriage counseling, a whole variety, a slew of services just outside providing religious services. So education is a big thing. And that's what I applaud First Liberty of doing, is being there as a resource for those that have questions.
I think you're right, Chad.
Yeah.
When I left military, I went to Wall Street. And after I left Wall Street, I came here. And so I've been out of the military, a good 15, 20 years when I showed up at First Liberty. And I was appalled, frankly, that the state of affairs inside the military with regard to religious liberty. I was embarrassed for the services, because it seemed like every week we were getting a new case where a chaplain was being told that they really couldn't offer counseling to the troops. All of these stories, some of them turned into cases and many others did not, but they were just incredible. How what was happening in the military is, I think you guys would agree with this, that sometimes we've been in the war on terror for a long time, but for the vast majority of the armed forces, they're really not at war. And so a peacetime military tends to kind of turn on itself a bit, because a lot of the leadership is more interested in advancing their own career rather than necessarily doing the right thing. And so our chaplains were being confronted by people who thought they were appeasing the leadership well above them. And so a lot of our cases were just, as I say, appalling, surprising that we were having to consider these things, where a chaplain was being told that they actually couldn't provide comfort to a dying soldier and provide a prayer to them when the soldier asked for it. And the chaplain was confronted about that and got in trouble. So it's been a privilege here at First Liberty to try to jump into the fight and help these folks. We have a lot of cases there, and I'll put a plug in here, but you can go to firstliberty.org and read a lot about the cases there that we do have underway, the support chaplains. And it's an amazing part of the ministry element of First Liberty to help these guys, to provide a necessary support to the young men and women in the service.
Chad and Steve, I want to give you a moment just to talk about the work you're doing now. Chad, I know you're working with Promise Keepers. I just want to give you a moment to talk about the work you're doing and why your heart's in it.
One of the things that for me, being in the corporate world after I retired from the Cowboys and starting my own business, I realized that I didn't have those friendships that I had in a fighter squadron or in a locker room, that I just didn't have those men that I could get around with, that I could be, form those transparent, Christ-centered, masculine relationships with. I miss that. So I started a men's ministry called Wingman that, provides it. It's a discipleship ministry. But then I heard that Promise Keepers was coming back, and I kind of asked, is that even still a thing? I'm surprised that it was even around, because I hadn't heard about it for many years. But it's coming back. And July 31st, we're going to have, due to the coronavirus, we were going to have an event at AT&T Stadium, but we're going to do a simulcast, live/simulcast event the 31st and August 1st, and do our live kickoff event next year at 2021 at AT&T Stadium here in Dallas area. But the reason why I'm getting involved with them and have my men's ministry is, before this pandemic, I believe there was a crisis of the isolated male. men that would withdraw from society because they didn't feel comfortable admitting that they didn't have it all together, that they were dealing with issues in life. They didn't, as I mentioned from my own personal experience, didn't have relationships, friendships with guys that, hey, I don't have it together. You know, my wife and I are having issues. I'm having addiction issues, whatever that might be, with substance abuse, pornography. And it's just providing that aspect of men to be men, and let alone to dump into the whole aspect of toxic masculinity and feminism and the attack on what it means to be masculine in our society today. You know, it's an opportunity for men to stay up. What does it mean to be a man of God? The biblical definition of manhood. And we need to be men. And that's where kind of my mantra, and I'll just close with this, is in 1 Corinthians 16:13, is to be watchful, to stand firm in the faith, act like men, and be strong. You know, St. Paul, that was a greeting that a lot of Roman soldiers would greet one another when they're on patrol or there. It's, you know, hey, we're getting ready to go to war, act like a man. And that's kind of the mantra that we need to have today in our culture, is to be the husbands, the fathers, the friends that God is calling us to be. Hey guys, we need to act like men.
All right, Steve.
No, that's really great. I like what you said, Chad, because you know, it's one of the things you realize that in life, you know, you mentioned that people aren't willing, that, you know, they're really uncomfortable admitting, you know, weaknesses and things where they places where they struggle. And what you realize is, because you see all this stuff on social media where it looks like that influencer or that celebrity, or, you know, they all have it together, their life is perfect. But when you really dig in, you realize that we all face the same struggles. We all have doubt and uncertainty. And so we need to do the things as you described, Chad, to be better. For me personally, what I'm doing is, I just recently, it wasn't too long ago, I retired December of 2019. And so I've started to become passionate about translating a lot of the lessons that I learned in my military career with other organizations, with individuals and businesses on how they can, build character, develop mental toughness, and use some of the processes that we use to be successful on the battlefield to advance their cause.
Very good. Dave, I want to take a little different twist on this. Each of the three of you has a very impressive resume. And yours is just as impressive. You could be doing a lot of different things right now, but you choose to work at a nonprofit like First Liberty Institute. Why is your heart in this? Personally for you, Dave Holmes, why is your heart in the work here?
Well, I think for me, I always felt like, I wanted to do something that was important to the country. And I can trace my family lineage all the way back to the Revolutionary War. And so it's sort of natural for me to go into the service. And so I left the military and I wanted to try something completely different. I had just come out on the colonel's list and opted to turn that down actually and start a new career on Wall Street. A lot of my jet school classmates were flying for the airlines, but I wanted to do something different. So I went to Wall Street and spent about 16 or 17 years doing that. And I found, as Chad alluded to it earlier, I just missed the sense of brotherhood, that you don't get, frankly, in a lot of corporations, especially Wall Street. It's very mercenary. It's all about money. And that wasn't enough for me. I needed more than that. And I felt like the Lord was leading me to something, and I was searching, frankly. Then I met a fellow named Kelly Shackford through a friend. And I don't know, I think I'd like to think it's the Holy Spirit, but Kelly uttered the famous words to me in my mind. He said, "You want to get back in the fight." And that back in the fight resonated, because this is a fight. We face some pretty strong adversary groups in this area, in this arena that we're in. And it is a battlefield. And we've got great warriors on our team, but not enough. And, I want to give a shout out to all of our donors and supporters that are listening to this, because we couldn't do this without you. But it is a big task that we have in front of us. And the idea of being once again in a fight where there's a one-loss record. And this is something we can't lose. That First Amendment's awfully important, as we're seeing these days. But I want to be back in the fight. I hope that's your answer.
Yeah, that's excellent. Hey, for those of you watching, if these issues matter to you, you can support religious freedom in the military by supporting First Liberty Institute. We're coming up on our fiscal year end. We've set a goal of $1.75 million to protect religious freedom for all Americans. And thanks to the generosity of others, we also have a $350,000 challenge grant to maximize the impact of your gift today. If this is something you want to see accomplished, if you think this is important to support the religious freedom of service members in the military and religious freedom for all Americans, that's what we do here. This is one way that you can see that that happens. Chad, Steve, Dave, thank you for sharing with us today, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks very much. Thanks, brothers.
And also want to say thank you to all those of you who joined us today. We appreciate your making some time for us. We appreciate your support as we go all in together to protect religious freedom for all Americans.